Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today, wherever you are in this great world. And, you know, it's really remarkable at 41 years old, 42 years old, and to be born in 1978 when there was no real... the drum machine had taken over and synthesizers had replaced horn sections and so many other things, and the humanity in the music had been stripped away, even at the pop level, to go back in time from before I was born and really investigate the lineage of conversational, improvisational music. And I've been blessed enough, due to health and medical technology, that a lot of the shaman cats, the accompanists, which used to be an amazing word and then became kind of a dirty word, actually helped create new musical vocabulary on the bandstand. And I get a chance today, so serendipitously, to talk to somebody who was really an instigator of that at so many levels and played on so many seminal albums, but truly found his own sound on the bandstand because he had the opportunity to get stuff out of his system every night, and he begged, borrowed, and steal from his elders, and then eventually found his own groove and his own voice, and remains today a stalwart of improvisational music. Chuck Israels, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you very much, Jake. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you, man. As best you can, I mean, prior to you and Don Friedman and Bill and LaFaro and Motion, and how would you describe what the bass player was doing on the bandstand or even on record? I know it was more like bebop, but like what were they doing before the conversational aspect of Israels and LaFaro came into the picture?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that these kinds of changes generally happen incrementally, and the kinds of changed stylistic, increased stylistic freedom that Scotty and Steve Swallow and Albert Stinson and I and a few other people brought into the jazz vocabulary. Those things, they didn't happen all of a sudden overnight.
Of course.
There were a lot of things, little elements in other people's playing that led us to embrace them and include them in our playing, and then little by little loosen up the idea that the bass player had to play quarter notes all the time. In fact, if you listen to the wonderful Ahmad Jamal records with the marvelous bass player Israel Crosby,
oh yeah,
there are real melodic bass parts in that music. I think they were pretty well arranged bass parts, but nevertheless creative and beautifully integrated into the music. And I don't know enough about the history of that to know how much of that was Ahmad's compositional and arranging contribution, and whether or not some of it came from Israel Crosby, I don't know. I only know Israel played the parts extraordinarily well. But those things were going on before Scotty.
You know, I know. I mean, Chuck, I'm just having. You're so humble. The other cat is Red Mitchell. He was a precursor, right?
Absolutely, and Red and I became good friends in 1955, and remained so throughout the rest of his life. And we used to spend time together whenever we could. Earlier than that, when he was in Los Angeles and doing a lot of studio work. When I was there playing with Bill, I spent a lot of time with Red. I was a great admirer of Red, and in fact remain in contact with his widow, Diane, who lives here in Portland.
Are you kidding me? I love that.
What? Yeah. She's a lovely person, and we are mutual admirers of Red.
This is just fascinating. I mean, you would say, it looks to me, I mean, it's quite remarkable, but how did you actually, get into the scene? I mean, Dave Liebman told me, arguably jazz was basically a black subculture even through the 70s. And that didn't mean that, if you could play, you could play. I mean, is there a definitive moment you can point to where you found yourself on the bandstand with people that were far better musicians than you, but you just played as if it was a matter of life and death?
Well, that happened while I was still in college at Brandeis. And I was living in Boston, in the Boston area and playing with really good jazz musicians there, including the two guys my age that I grew up with, Steve Kuhn and Arnie Wise. Both of whom were fine players. And we used to work together at a coffee shop in Harvard Square called Mount Auburn 47 that later became famous as
Is that where you met Maynard Solomon?
No, I knew Manny Solomon, I think probably through my parents.
I didn't mean to cut you off. It's so classic because when you said Club 47, that's where Queskin and Moldauer were cooking the jug band there on Vanguard Records. That's the only reason it popped into my head. Go ahead, continue. Continue.
Well, that was probably after we had been.
That's right. Okay.
It was a jazz place before, and then I took a trip to Europe after I graduated from Brandeis and found myself playing with Kenny Clark and Bud Powell and Lucky Thompson and people like that.
Holy cow, man. That's unbelievable. And so it was like 50. What year is this?
I'm sorry?
What year was
1959.
Okay, got it.
And into 1960.
Okay, so you guys are playing acoustic trio music, but and then you went to Europe, and amazingly enough, a lot of those cats had already moved there. What would you describe, I guess maybe more to the point, like the role of the bass player in your mind? What is the ultimate role of the bass player? Is it to lock the groove and play melodically around it? What is it about that? Why was that? I mean, I listened to the Vanguard sessions with Scotty. I listened to the work you did with Shelly Mann and Bill, and I'm telling you, every time I could turn on side A and side B and side A and side B, it sounds different every time. And I really wanted you to talk to the audience about this concept, and if it was ever really talked about, or just that's the way it is, that you never played the same song the same way once.
First of all, that's a little bit of an illusion.
I know it is.
There are variations, and it's true that all of our performances were somewhat different. If they weren't a little different, we'd have gotten bored. And that spontaneity is a part of music making that belongs in every kind of music making. Boy, this gets hard to talk about. I remember some Steve Martin quote that talking about music is like dancing about architecture.
You know, I mean, I know you're just getting hip to my show, but I don't care if it's Don Thompson, Ron Carter, Chuck Israels, Bill Cosby, whoever it is, this is all I talk to them about, because it's so, as a Gen Xer, I mean, I'm 42, all I care about on my show is making sure that future generations understand how real music is made. Part of that is having real human beings doing it. Part of it's also concept, and I recognize it's just, I cannot understand how it's just the most magical, amazing stuff, and it probably doesn't seem that big a deal to you because you've played hundreds and thousands of live gigs. I mean, you recognize, Chuck, as I know you do, that when the Schillinger School opened, that in fact, you know, that was a place for Charlie Mariano to come off the road as a professional musician, to take some time off the road, which can eat you alive, or learn a new instrument. Whereas today, you got cats paying thousands of dollars to go to the academy to learn a language that's been codified, that cannot be codified, to come out of there with no guarantee of any career. So the whole idea of a musician, a professional musician, was considered legitimate. And I'm not saying that people didn't scuffle or people didn't get ripped off, but it was deemed a profession. And now it is part of the working poor. So, and I totally understand it's hard to talk about, but what I call on you guys to go deep, because these abstractions will resonate long after we're gone.
I'm sure they will, and I think that's the test. Durability is the only test, we live in a world of evanescent, disappearing things that imitate music, and that world is an obstacle for me and has been for many years. And you're talking about a life that I had years ago, and where I was lucky enough to participate in a certain role in making a lot of music that I loved then and still love now. And my life since then has been an increasingly uphill battle to maintain my musical life and to swim through this sea of mediocrity.
Oh yeah.
And reach some kind of shoreline of an audience that understands the language that I speak. And it's an abstract language, and of course we can talk about it, and we can describe it in words, and a lot more people pay a lot more attention to me when I'm speaking than when I'm playing, because more people understand English than understand the music. But that's
well. Let's just break this down, because it's been an uphill battle, because it's really not that sophisticated. What you're doing, listen, you know better than anybody. Art Blakey, he said, my job is to wash away the dust of everyday life for the people that come in to see my shows. These were essentially blue-collar cats. The reason that it's been an uphill battle is because there are a lot of people who don't know how to feel the music anymore. They have had digital beats crunched into their ears for the last 2 decades. The rhythm has been quantized. It's not round. So they can't feel the soul that's coming out of it. I am not a musician. I play some conga drums to Cal Jader records. But, really, at the end of the day, man, it's so warm and it feels so good. It doesn't matter technically what you're doing. We're talking about lack of attention span, quantized rhythm, and really the more disturbing part for me is people's inability to truly feel the music. Because I guarantee you, if I was alive at that time, or if I was hanging with Kuhn and Coltrane, I'd walk or Swallow, even if it was an acoustic music set, I'd walk out of there feeling the music, healing from the music. So I think that's the point, is that the significance of music has changed in our culture. But I want to go back to this time of, like, did you recognize, I mean, I'm looking here, Cecil Taylor, Coltrane, you were on this Coltrane album in 59? Is that Coltrane time?
1958. It was I was still in college, and it was actually an LP that was produced in March of 1958. I was 22, and I guess I was a junior at Brandeis at the time.
If you could talk about Dolphy and Train and what made them inspirational characters. I don't know about Dolphy. I think he was pretty shy too, but Train would never take the horn out of his mouth. I mean, what was it about those guys that was inspiring to you?
Well, first of all, I was more inspired and more interested in Eric.
Explain why.
Because his approach to music was, I understood and appreciated his approach to music more than John Coltrane's. I think a lot of John Coltrane's popularity had to do with his lining up his playing with the LSD mood of the time.
Really?
Yeah.
This is really important. I mean, Chuck, you're nailing it. But my second book came out about the Merry Pranksters and Ken Kesey, and there really wasn't. Of course, they were giving a lot of LSD to people. You're saying Train was channeling. Was he on psychedelics in the late 50s?
I have no idea. I doubt it. No. How can I express this usefully? His music is trance music.
Yeah, it is.
Eric's music is both emotionally driving and intellectually driven. It has the variety in if there's variety in Coltrane's music, it's covered up by too much repetition. And that is not true of Eric's music.
That is really well put. And it's not that's not a judgment on whether it's good or bad. It's just, that's just what it is.
Yes, I have my own value system that functions for me, but there's a certain objectivity in that. That is, in fact, Coltrane's music is enormously repetitive. It's very fast, covers a lot of ground, over and 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 over again. And Eric's music is more the form and design of it is more important and perhaps more apparent. I'm a bigger fan of Monk and Eric than of Coltrane.
You know, I love
Sonny
yeah.
Rollins.
Yeah, okay, so this is now, I don't listen to a lot of Train. I think I come home every day and I put on, I burn some incense and put on Love Supreme, and I'm getting off on the padding and the sheets of sound of Elvin and McCoy. I also where we are today, I mean, let's face it, your mayor of your city just got pepper sprayed last night.
Yes.
Okay, so when I hear Coltrane at that age, in that time, what an avatar. He was praying. He was praying. I mean, that's like spiritual music. I agree with you. It's raga based in some ways. He was obviously entranced with scales, Indian scales, but that was like prayer music. Whereas Dolphy was, I guess what I'm saying is, in your mind, there's a lot of repetition with Train, And with Dolphy's compositions, you often found in your mind that there was a beginning, a middle, and a coherent beginning, middle, and end with a story to tell.
That's a pretty good way of it's a pretty concise way of getting at what my point is. And I'm a particularly Western person.
You're not a Ravi Shankar. Like Louis Hayes was playing with Ravi Shankar and Gary Peacock, but you wouldn't find Chuck Israel. Chuck Israel wasn't on Raga Records or things like that.
No,
Yeah.
and I probably people take jobs because the jobs are there.
Sure.
Sometimes, and I can hardly be critical of that. We all have to survive, but my choice would not have been to go in that direction.
Dude, I'm smiling ear to ear right now. The other thing about your generation that is so nasty and awesome, and I need to ask you this. Well, you were at Brandeis, so I mean, all I know is that, like, did you know at the time, or only in retrospect, does it seem now to make more sense that, Cannonball, again, you weren't crazy about Train, but Sonny Rollins, Charlie Neville, so many amazing players walked the bar before they played bebop. Did you know that when you were collaborating with them, or only later on? Because the point is that they were fully connected to the blues, and we're going to get into that with you. But what I hear today with younger cats, for a variety of reasons, is a homogenization of sound. And with jazz, I hear it's become very classicalized. I don't hear the blues. But when I listen back to the older stuff, I hear the blues right alongside the jazz. And I know I'm not crazy because my friends that I've interviewed, like Kenny Burrell, they say as much. And I wasn't sure if you were aware about those cats walking the bar before they were playing bebop.
I learned to play the blues before I learned to play jazz.
I knew it. Go ahead.
Folk music forms and simple. I learned simple music before I learned complicated music. And by simple music, I'm not talking about So What, which is simple but difficult.
Yes.
I'm talking about When the Saints Go Marching In, and the blues, and songs that are shapely, whose shape is easy to follow. Songs that have harmony that moves you from one place to another and guides you through a harmonic phrase, takes you at one point and carries you and lands you again at another point. The blues does that. I Got Rhythm does that. All of Me does that. Sunny Side of the Street does that. Honeysuckle Rose does that. These are all pieces that I learned early on in my career, and pieces I was attracted to, sometimes because of their simplicity and strength. So all of these things you're talking about, they all make complete sense to me, and they all existed in an unusual time historically.
Oh, I mean, dude, you want to talk about to me, this is the most psychedelic time, and I don't mean people were dropping acid. I mean, it's just the cross-pollination of music. And I must ask you, you talk about these form-based folk and blues tunes that were, quote-unquote, simple. I also think that maybe you can ask, I mean, do you remember the first time you played in a folk setting with a trap set? I mean, for the most part, you had to have your own time feel on the bass. I mean, I just interviewed Colin Bailey, this is going back to 1941. The first band he was in, they didn't even know what a bass was. They had 2 accordions, drums, and a banjo. So I mean,
yeah. Well, the first bands I played in, I played guitar in when I was 12 years old. In summer camp, I played for square dances with a violinist and an accordion player.
Oh, man. How did that sound?
Well, it was okay. First of all, you can't play out of rhythm when there are 50 people stomping around the room in square dance rhythm. You can't. It prevents you from timing errors. The physical movement in the room controls you and gives you a good beat.
Absolutely.
And
I wanted you to talk, because this is so important, is that for a long time, I'm just wondering about early bands, how you learned to develop your own inner time feel. When I interviewed Julian Priester, he played with Sun Ra in Chicago, and this is before, I think he had the orchestra at this point, but the thing is that Julian said everybody needed to have their own internal time feel. And what that did was that freed up the rhythm section to not necessarily always have to keep time. They could play melodically. And so that all came from the fact that the upright bass, or the bass, maybe whatever bass you were playing, you were the anchor. Were most of your early gigs without a trap drummer?
I'm trying to remember. This is ancient history for me.
Yeah, we're going deep.
Look, I started out as a classical cellist and a folk music guitar player. So that's my...
I cannot believe you're dropping this knowledge. A folk music guitar player?
Sure. I grew up with Pete Seeger in my house, and Leadbelly, and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee.
Oh my
in
God.
Our house when we lived in Cleveland. And Pete Seeger I knew all my life. I mean, he was a close family friend. So I was playing folk songs when I was a kid, learning harmony by playing Shoe Fly, Don't Bother Me, and simple songs. It was a long time before I figured out what a secondary dominant was, that may not even be anything you know what it is. It's the name of something that you hear all the time, but in jazz vocabulary. But I started out with simple music. I started out learning not in an academic way. I did learn academically as well, but most of my acquisition of knowledge was in apprenticeship circumstances, much more normal ways of learning, the way you learn to speak. I was around people who spoke better than me, and I learned to speak our verbal language, and that's how I learned musical language. And that's what the Suzuki people have figured out about teaching music.
It's ear training, right? Ear training.
Yeah, ear training without any particular heavy burden of trying to give names to things.
Oh, I love it.
You hear this, do it. You hear somebody do that same thing that person is doing. And there's a lot of that in my musical history, and
well, I want to. You're blowing my. You're on fire.
I want to paint a little picture here.
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Understand. I grew up in an era that I believed was normal. It wasn't. It was historically quite abnormal. I grew up in an era when popular music was written by and consumed by educated people. popular music was geared towards people with an education. George Gershwin, Cole Porter, Frank Lesser, Harry Warren, the list goes on and on. Duke Ellington, Fats Waller, all of that music you could hear on the radio every day.
Right.
I thought it was normal. I thought in the mid-'60s, when the baby boom generation reached adolescence, and 76 million adolescents were suddenly in the world with money in their pockets, I thought that was a revolution that destroyed normalcy in how the market gravitated towards getting teenagers money. And teenage music took over the world and marginalized everything else. And I thought, my God, what's happened to this wonderful world that I lived in? Well, the wonderful world I lived in was terribly unusual, because if you go back before the early 20th century and late 19th century, if you go back earlier than that, popular music was crap then too. And all we know of it is the music that was subsidized by the church and monarchies. All the remains of the music that we revere, European culture, that's none of that. Some of it is based on an understanding of folk music. Bach's music is full of dance forms and folk music. Bartok's music the same. You can't let go of that if you want to have music that relates to people's most basic feelings. I've wandered off topic here.
No, you're not, dude. You're on. Listen, I'm going to go back to something here. You said that in '65, the adolescent boomers had money in their pocket, and it disrupted this platform, this abnormal but very rich platform of music. And I just wrote down two words because I want to get your thoughts on. Okay, so these teenagers had money. The cost of living was very low. You had cats like Jorma Kaukonen and bluegrass guys moving into the Haight Street area that were considered skiffle players. So all of a sudden, my question is, did the apprentice mentality of music disappear because all of a sudden musicians who really didn't know how to play music were given record deals?
That was one of the elements of it. The other element.
Can you talk about the other elements, about what disrupted this abnormal but incredibly beautiful time?
Well, in terms of the apprentice model, integrating jazz into school music curriculums destroyed the apprentice model. It had its upsides and downsides, the integration of that into the academic world. I mean, it had some. It wasn't an entirely bad thing, but it did, in fact, create a way appreciation. I just loved it. I didn't have to know that it was important. I didn't have to know that it was accepted by that it was an accepted cultural thing of cultural value. Yeah, I just liked it, so I wanted to learn about it. It was pretty much as simple as that. I also grew up in a family of musicians, so that is, my stepfather was a wonderful baritone, a fine singer. So I heard, and he had an eclectic musical point of view. So I heard Schubert and Ives and Pete Seeger and Louis Armstrong. And so
that's great. I want to read this, and I want to read you. This is from my second book. I interviewed Mason Williams, and I want to read this to you, and then you can riff on it anyway.
Who is Mason Williams?
He was the lead. Well, Mason Williams was the lead writer for the Smothers Brothers, and he
Oh, okay.
and he also he did that. He's most well known for writing that tune "Classical Gas," but he was a folk musician. He was a folkie. He said,
Okay.
"The two people I met in my life who I thought were great men were Pete Seeger and Ken Kesey. Not only were they clever and could write great songs and great books, they were able to embrace all of humanity, warts and all, I guess you might say. All kinds of people would come by Ken's place and visit and talk, and they were welcome. Pete Seeger was always trying to improve the welfare of the common man. It was the broad love of humanity. There's footage of Seeger standing out in the snow on a street corner singing songs about peace. You don't want to just be clever. You also want to be effective. The man was a humanitarian. That's what rubbed off on Israel's. And that was the fact of saying it didn't, that's the whole point of view that you took in, is that it wasn't about being important or popular or great. It was about, did it feel good? Was there curiosity to it? And could you connect and inspire other human beings making this music?
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And Pete was an incredibly admirable person like that, and it was his nature. I hesitate to say that he didn't work on that, because I believe we all have a certain conscious element to molding our character. We choose things, elements of our character. Pete's choices were wonderful choices. And everybody who was around him loved him. You couldn't help it, because he loved everybody around him.
I mean, he was a crusader for social justice too. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
It's incredible, man. I mean, were you privy to that? I mean, did you even maybe jam? Did you ever jam with him, or you just knew him as a folklore?
I did it when I was 10 years old. I was singing with him and playing.
Oh my gosh, that
sometimes
is insane.
on stage. I'm sitting here I moved to the bedroom because Margot was practicing next door, and it was a little noisy.
Yes.
And I'm sitting here looking at a picture of Paul Robeson, a photograph I took in 1955 of Paul Robeson holding my kid brother Josh, who was an infant at the time, in his big, enormous hands, this little tiny white package in Robeson's hand. He was Josh's godfather. So yes, I was completely aware of the social perspective of Pete and Paul, and my family was involved in that. They were all, well, at that point, many of them were communists.
Right.
We were all progressives. And
was it socialism or socialists or communists?
Well, at that point, people that I grew up with were unaware of the totalitarian
Yes.
evil of Stalin.
Right.
So the general perception was that communism was going to solve the inequalities in the world. People seem to be terribly afraid of that word, but I wonder if they've ever been to Norway or Sweden or Denmark and seen how well the countries function.
Yeah, those countries are much more in touch, as men and women recognize the divine masculine and the divine feminine within each of each other. So there's not this play for this, alpha male. They don't. The problem with this country is they view it as weakness or lack of strength, and it's just we're dealing with a whole sociological issue, which I don't want to get into, about the fact that what are the divine masculine qualities within men that have to come to the forefront in order for women and to trust them again. I mean, it's a debaucherous situation. I think that those countries have a much more enlightened understanding of the human condition. I mean, listen, Chuck. I mean, it's almost it's almost so beautiful and preposterous to realize that it was very possible that you were at a certain point playing at the Village Gate with Dave Van Ronk, and then playing a jazz gig with any drummer. I mean, Judy Henske, who I've interviewed, and that woman, Herbie Hancock, was playing a Wurlitzer or acoustic. Peter Betts was the bass player. I mean, it was like this. Can you talk about one of these experiences where you, in one night, you played a folk gig and then you played like burning jazz gig?
I don't know that they were juxtaposed that way so closely. Generally speaking, I became more interested in the expanded vocabulary of jazz, and so folk gigs were kind of limited. One thing I can tell you is that I was in Europe playing with Bud Powell and came back to Boston in 1960 or 61, I can't remember. And the Mount Auburn 47, where I had been playing with Steve Kuhn and Arnie Wise, was no longer had jazz. There were no jazz opportunities in Boston. And so there was this beautiful young woman playing guitar and singing, and she sang so well and played the guitar so well, and she was such a beautiful storyteller in her singing that and she was drop dead gorgeous and super smart. I went in there and I played the bass with her because it was the most musical thing available to me. I never got paid for that. I just played with her. That was Joan Baez.
Oh my! I thought you were going to say it's Judy Collins, but because you
no. Yeah, I've worked with Judy Collins too. That's another story. That's someone
dude. Wait a minute, Joan Baez. That is so ridiculous.
But there's a world of difference between Joan and Judy in terms of artistic understanding and musical expression.
Absolutely, no, different deal. You said something interesting. You were getting off more on the expansion of vocabulary in jazz, musical vocabulary in jazz. I know, again, we're going into the abstractions here, but what I need you to talk to me about the growth, because one thing we haven't talked about is like, early rock and roll, Little Richard, Elvis, Fats Domino, and then you had like Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, and then a lot of that was actually being played on radio, and then there was this payola scandal, and all of a sudden you had, Tom Jones covering, I don't know, some other black dude's tune, and then in jazz, I mean, people will say Miles was bored to death of bebop. And there's this sort of seminal demarcation point at the Plug Nickel in '65 when basically Tony, Herbie, and Ron Carter and Wayne and Miles, they started to take traditional standards, then leave the head of the tune, quadruple the time, and so you would almost lose what the song was. They'd leave the tune, then all come back in at the same time. They were stretching out the music. That was '65. In your mind, what was the expansion of the music in your mind that was scintillating to you?
Well, that wasn't.
I know, and I dig that, and I want to know what Chuck Israel's getting off.
I didn't care about that, and I don't believe for a minute that it had to do with Miles' boredom.
What do you mean? Really? Well, no, because actually the story that I heard is that the guys in the band were really bored to death. And they made a blood oath. They made a blood oath saying, "Listen, this is what we're going to do on the tunes tonight. We're going to stretch out and maybe even change the time." And they get there, and Miles is like, "We're recording tonight," and they're like, "Okay, we still have to go through with it." And they did it, and Miles dug it. So I mean, there might be a little. I think you're right about that. But anyway, for you, this is this critical period of insanity. When rock, Little Richard found God, Elvis went to the army. There was this vapid time, except in conversational, melodic improvisation. The floor is yours.
So what's the question?
The question is, what were you hearing as an extension of, it was not, post-bop what was in between bebop and post-bop in that early 60s period that you gravitated to?
Bill Evans.
Right, and for the layperson, what was he? I mean, what did he allow that fostered the extension of vocabulary?
Same thing that Ellington allowed, which was a more expressive range in terms of mood and tempo and styles of pieces. We haven't really talked about Ellington here, and that's while all this stuff is going on and all this supposedly avant-garde and experimental stuff, Ellington's music is more advanced than any of it all the time.
That's a remarkable statement to make, but I'm not disagreeing with it. It doesn't sound avant-garde, but can you explain what you mean? Listen, let me just say, I know it's not my deep bag. I do know that in terms of getting off of like large sort of ensemble playing, he definitely allowed individual improvisation to take place. But I know that that's not really that deep. So I'd really love you to talk about, Duke always said, 1 foot in the blues, 1 foot in the future. So just you can riff on that any way you want.
Yeah, and that's a great that's a great statement. But we're all talking about things, describing things in words. We're describing an abstract language.
I know.
In concrete, with words that have concrete meaning. And music doesn't have concrete meaning. It has an abstract meaning. And that meaning is not translatable. It has its own life. It's not effectively about anything except human experience. And I like music that describes my human experience. And the Beatles don't describe my musical experience. I like that, it's okay. I don't think it's horrible music, but that's not me.
Totally. Me either.
Ray Charles,
no, but I mean,
yeah,
go ahead.
Ray Charles is more me, and I'm not a black guy, and I haven't lived the kind of life he's lived. Yet he embraces things in his musical expression that sound like my experience of the world.
I love it.
Duke Ellington expresses things in his music that sound like my experience of the world. Bill Evans is very much my experience of the world. And I'm still, we're talking now about all this history, opportunities, and that I've had, nor do I want to take away from my contributions to them. I don't know how big they were, but I certainly made a contribution. But I'm busy every day writing music. I have a band here, except for the fact that we've been shut down for some months now. I'm making music constantly with the same aesthetic point of view that I've always had. It's maybe broadened a little bit. I appreciate Monk a lot more now than I did when I used to work opposite him at the 5 Spot. I appreciate Mingus's music more than I did then because I was so narrowly focused on things like Bill Evans and J.J. Johnson, things that were a little bit neater and a little less kind of emotionally explosive.
Wait a minute, though.
But,
hold on for a second. You talked about tempo. I mean, with you said mood, tempo, and styles is what you got off on about Evans and J.J. Johnson. I mean, did you get uptight about speeding up and slowing down tempos?
Oh, no. Well, if it was purposeful, it was okay with me.
Okay, cool. No, I'm saying that's very hip. Go ahead.
Yeah. If there's a reason, if it made sense to me musically, what Herbie and Tony Williams and those guys did in that band was irrational to me.
Yeah, I can honestly say it's not my bag either. So you're preaching to the choir, except I respect the fact that they were just trying to give an honest presentation of the music, of their.
Well, it was, they believed in it.
Right.
Look, I want to tell you. I'll tell you a quote from somewhere.
Please.
I don't know where it's from, but it's an interesting quote. That Beethoven's music has complete surprises that seem inevitable in retrospect. That's something to think about.
I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that.
Well, what that means is that you go along listening to Beethoven's music and something comes out of the blue and hits you. Bang! Some big change in the music. Why did that come there? Well, as soon as you think back on it, you see that everything that preceded that moment prepared you for that moment. That's a structural, formal use of the musical language that makes sense to me. That's rational in some way. I don't hear that rationality in the band that we were just discussing. And I've worked with Herbie, and I respect Herbie, and he's a lovely man, and he's a tremendously gifted guy, and all of that. I just don't agree with all of his aesthetic choices.
Yeah, well, I know the answer, but can you talk about W. Eugene Smith's Loft?
Well, yeah.
Because let me tell you something, man. I want to tell you something. This apprenticeship, I mean, Swallow and I have cooked the groove. We've done 3 interviews, and this is just set 1 for us. I mean, you talked about we're using words to describe abstraction music. That's why my show has saliency for the last 10 years. So what I'm trying to say is that apprenticeship, the flowers getting delivered at 5 in the morning, Hal Overton was in there, and I know Israel's was cooking the groove in there. And so I'm just saying there's an existential crisis in our civilization as it relates to the significance of melodic, abstract music. And I'm trying to get back to a time when this was I'm not saying it was the norm, it was for seekers, but I want to know about Chuck Israel's at Eugene Smith's Loft.
Okay, Eugene Smith was always writing about these things. I was there because I had composition lessons with Hall and occasionally played there, but mostly it was just me with a pencil and paper and sitting at the piano with Hall and trying to learn how to organize my musical thoughts into useful ensemble music. And then I would go across the street, and you're right, it is the Flower District, and right upstairs above one of the flower shops, I would visit Zero Mostel and Herb Callum, who had a painting studio right over the
unbelievable
wholesale flower shop. And anyway, it was a great time, and nobody knew that it was an unusual time. We just grew up in it, and it was normal to us. There was a lot going on with Hall, and he was also a very eclectic and interesting musician, and introduced me to a lot of things about music that I needed to know. He was an ideal teacher for me. And he taught me things that I turned around and helped Paul Simon with when he was struggling with kind of musical obstacles.
Can you give an example?
Well, that's another kind of long story, but I
It's all right.
became acquainted with Paul, and we were sort of friends for a while. And he needed some. He got stuck writing. He'd get to a point in the song where he'd say, "Well, I've written this much now, and I know something needs to change here. I don't know what to do." And Phil Ramone, his producer, said, "Well, call either Bob James or Chuck Israel. They'll help you." And he knew me, so he called me up, and I told him the things that Hall Overton had shown me to how what to do when you get stuck. Compositional techniques that help you out of dead ends. I mean, I could describe some what they were, but it
wouldn't really translate over. Yeah, so he was really somebody who could, seemingly be up against a brick wall, but then make a left turn and pivot out, and then you're into a new space.
Right, and he's very smart, Paul.
Yeah,
very, very smart, and he was a quick study. It was fun working with him because of that. Because you really didn't have to tell him anything twice.
I mean, I can't gloss over this because I've interviewed Bill Keith, Richard Green, Maria Moldauer, Queskin. I've been all around this world, and Maynard Solomon. You're telling me that you and Seeger and him were hanging out when you were a kid?
No. Maynard Solomon was a friend of my. Let's not convolute too many things here.
Yeah.
Manny Solomon and Seymour Solomon, the Solomon brothers. This is all left-wing politics stuff.
I dig it.
These are people who were part of progressive politics in the 50s, people who either somehow were not selected out or survived the McCarthy era. And those were all people I grew up with. I
love it, Chuck. They were pushing back against the Red Scare, McCarthyism. Somehow
yes.
they didn't get swept up in it, though.
Right, yeah. But Zero got swept up in it, and our friend Lester Cole, who was one of the Hollywood 10, got swept up in it. Robeson eventually had to leave the country.
Who was the first cat you said? Zero? Who?
Zero Mostel.
Oh, see, okay, you're dropping knowledge on me. So, I mean, obviously there were casualties. Yeah.
You don't know who Zero Mostel is?
Chuck, I know Chuck
Wait
is.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hold on, have you ever seen The Producers?
Yes.
That's Zero Mostel, the actor, the big fat guy.
Wow.
He was a brilliant man. He was the first Tevye in what the hell is the name of that? Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway. That was Zero Mostel. He was in Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. He was a great actor.
So the fact that Maynard and his brother. How did you meet them?
I only remember meeting them when they approached me for some reason and asked me to be the A&R man, what we would now call producer, for Pat Martino's first record, which, as far as I know, hasn't been released.
You are 100%. I'm going to read you the story. I'm going to send you the interview later. You're going to be laughing hysterically. I just want to read you this. This is from my 5th radio interview with Pat Martino. He said, I asked him about Larry Coryell. He said, Larry was an incredible source of ideas for the music business for decades. I don't see the living process as a loss in any way. I see the vehicle change, but I don't see the source of the power that operates them as being subject to birth and death. I believe in life eternal. I believe in eternal life. I don't see a loss in the process. I see a different vehicle is in process right now. The last time we played together was at the Blue Note in New York City. Larry had his group. It had 2 guitars, Larry and Vic Juris. I had my organ trio that I'm currently using. The one thing I noticed so much about Larry is as a leader, as a businessman, as an entertainer, it was incredibly serious entertainment with Larry. Chuck Israels was my producer at the time. It was my first album for Vanguard Records. Vanguard Records signed me to get me off the street. Chuck brought in Ron Carter and Tommy Flanagan, amongst others. They paid me $500 for that, which I thought was a lot of money at the time. Primarily because they invested a lot of money in Larry Coryell. That's how Larry and I met. Larry was my enemy at the time. He was what the record business can do to an artist if they know anything about how they work. Later on, when Larry and I met personally, things changed drastically. The person then came through. He wasn't really wearing the mask of the record label. I don't really care about, Coryell was, I love him too. When you saw Pat at Small's Paradise with Willis Jackson, or how did you find him? Or they just, did you
I didn't find him. They paid him $500. They paid me $100.
And you're telling me they just ran? You came with no acumen? How did they? This is ridiculous. They knew you from somewhere.
I don't know where they knew me from. I have no. Well, I really don't know. I don't remember.
I believe you.
And maybe it was because they knew Morty, my stepfather. I do know that when when I was playing with Joan in Cambridge, that both Columbia Records and Vanguard Records were wooing her, and she asked me what I thought about that, and she told me that she liked Manny and Seymour, and I said, well, so do I. I think they're really good people, and if you have a good feeling about them, that's probably not a bad idea to follow that. Anyway, there was some words to that effect. This is all memories of memories.
That should be a new song. Memories of memories. No, the thing is that were you hip? That was Pat. And by the way, you're right. That has never been released, man. I pray that it wasn't lost in that fire in New Jersey where they lost everything.
I have no idea.
You produced the session, so you're telling me that they were able to bring you in as a one-off deal, or did you spend?
That's all. Yes, that's all. And I suppose I could have pursued it if I thought that was a role. I look back on it and think, well, that might have been something interesting to do. But it was only a distraction to me at the time because I didn't think of myself as a record producer. I didn't think of myself as having any other roles in the world except being a bass player. So suddenly I was sitting in the recording booth and sort of organizing things and gently suggesting what people should do and getting paid $100. Well, I guess $100 was a lot of money at that point. If they were paying Pat $5 and they may have paid me $100. It just never crossed my mind. I
dig. You never met Pat before the date?
No. That was where we met, and we have been very friendly ever since.
He's very ill right now.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that later. You wind up on all these, Joan and you had, going back to the folk days of Cambridge. I did notice one of the albums on, I think, let me see here, the Judy Collins concert. I don't know if that was on Elektra or Vanguard.
Probably Elektra.
Yeah.
Probably Elektra.
Yeah, probably Elektra. So, that was a one-off deal. That's wild.
I was her music director for a period of a few months. It was not an entirely happy experience. She's a fine person. She's also a friend of the family, and somebody I've known for years, and quite a decent person. But we have artistic differences that,
of course,
are probably irreconcilable.
You know, one thing it's very magical, and I chronicled it in my second book about the original Merry Pranksters, is one of the guys who I believe you probably knew and perhaps collaborated with was a cat named Hugh Romney, better known as Wavy.
No, I don't.
Wavy Gravy.
I don't know who that is.
Wavy Gravy.
I don't know. No, yeah, I know the name. I know that name, but that's not anybody I knew.
Did you?
I was really.
No, I want to be clear. No, I know you weren't in the hippie scene, but what I'm trying to say is that dude on Monday nights took Don Ellis, Jimmy Jufrey, and Jackie Byard up to the Golden Lion in Hartford, Connecticut for a paid gig. He would riff poetry behind beboppers. So did you have opportunities to play jazz behind beat poets?
No.
Never.
No.
So that's one of the that even so. I guess you know. Were you in this, especially in the early to mid '60s? I mean, the record dates speak for themselves, but how much were you living? Were you in radio registry? Were you doing jingles and commercials? Or
I was in radio registry and I did a few, but I was hardly. I wasn't busy with that.
And so my question is where were you were picking and choosing what were the live tours? Did you do a lot of touring? I mean, who were you playing with?
No, I stayed in New York most of the time. I worked first with George Russell,
right?
Then with Bill, then with Stan Getz, then back with Bill, and after that, when I left Bill in 1966, I mean, my career was really short. All of this.
Your career is the most insane. It's all my favorite people, man.
Well, it was really short. It was busy, but by the time I left Bill, I became interested in composition and in controlling my musical world. I probably would have been completely satisfied to stay with Bill forever if he hadn't been chemically dependent.
Right.
If he had run that trio the way John Lewis ran the Modern Jazz Quartet, he'd have had a permanent band. But that didn't interest him, and he was occupied with feeding his drug habits.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I decided I wanted to be able to make music like that, and I couldn't depend on him for the rest of my life. So I had to learn how to write music and control things on my own. So I went and studied with Hall Overton. I worked in musical theater to survive. I played in Broadway shows. I eventually became a associate conductor of a Broadway show. I lived in New York. I had rehearsal bands. Then I started the National Jazz Ensemble and ran that for some years and that changed other things in our lives. It made probably made our living conditions less threatened because things are easier on this side of the country.
They are. Well, they were anyway. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That uprooted me from what I consider to be my home. I'm a displaced New Yorker and New York and New England person, and that's home to me.
Your vibe. You're an omnivore of music, and you have your tastes, and I think it's fantastic. And we were friends for a minute on Facebook when I was really just stumbling around trying to find my voice, and it was people like Mickey Roker and Jack DeJohnette and Dave Brubeck who helped me find my voice, and so many great stories about Chuck Israels. I'm going to read you this. This is from my interview with the late, great Bob Cranshaw. He said, one day Chuck Israels called me because we all knew each other. He was doing an off-Broadway show called The House of Flowers. He was getting ready to go west, and he asked me if I wouldn't mind doing the show for him. The show was Sesame Street. Can you talk about that experience with Joe Raposo?
Well, yeah. First of all, Joe Raposo and I knew each other from college. He was at Harvard the same time Steve Kuhn was, and he had a kind of Dave Brubeck-style quartet. And so we knew each other. And I got to New York, and Joe used to hire me for jingle gigs. And he loved my playing, and I played electric bass. And then he had this reduced version of House of Flowers. It's Harold Arlen music and the Truman Capote show, all black cast about Jamaica.
Wow.
Jamaican culture. And it was at the Theatre de Lys, and I was playing the show, and the band was less than good. And the orchestrations were okay. But I was not particularly happy, and I don't know I don't think that was the time that I moved west. I think I just found another gig and didn't want to do that gig, and called Joe and said, hey, I'll send you a sub, and it'll be somebody good. And my point of view about sending the subs is never send anybody less good than you are. So this
is the greatest part of the story. Raposo became the musical director. This was what Cranshaw said. He goes, when I came in, the first thing I did was lock the time down. I made sure it felt good, and it eliminated everyone trying to get out front and do this or that. Everybody was going to do exactly what they were doing, but it was going to feel good. These people are going to enjoy the show. Now, you were playing a Fender bass. You weren't playing an electric, right? You were playing a Fender bass.
Yeah. And I gave that up. I think that may be the last time I played it.
What about this? What about on these Esther Phillips albums in 75s? I mean, I think you were probably cooking an electric bass on those.
Who says I was on them?
Well, I'm looking at your ridiculous all-music guide, Capricorn Princess, Esther Phillips.
Doesn't sound right to me.
It doesn't sound right to me either, but it's got all your people on it. Sam Brown, Ronnie Cooper. Oh, this looks way off. How could Chuck Israels be on this? That doesn't sound...
Is there a string section?
Absolutely. It's a CTI special.
Oh, well, then I'm...
Oh, okay. That's what...
And I probably never saw Esther Phillips in my life. Those are things you did after, you just came in and somebody put music in front of you. You picked up the bow and played the bass in a string section that was a sweetening session that was overlaid on tracks that were already there.
Can I just venture a guess to say that, and again, I mean, you first collaborated with Herbert Hancock in '63, which was an acoustic time, but you've never been fond of plugging in. You've always been an acoustic cat. Is that fair to say?
Writes for the Wall Street Journal and has a daily jazz wax email kind of blog thing. Sent some Brazilian music that was made on with perfectly okay music, played on electric pianos and electronically processed music. And I was going to write to him and say, Mark, don't you think that this sounds like how can you take this seriously when it sounds like a painting in day glow colors, or a sculpture in neon lights. It's not completely awful. It's so lacking in nuance and humanity. It's separated from humanity.
Absolutely.
And I come back again to my sense that what I'm interested in is how the abstraction of musical language brings me closer to understanding my human experience. When I watch, Margot and I sometimes watch this television show called World of Dance, in which dancers and dance groups compete in front of judges, J-Lo and a couple other guys, interesting judges. And a lot of the dancing that they do looks like machines. The aesthetic of the dance is not to look like an animal or a human, but rather to imitate how machines look.
I mean, Chuck, I'm 42, and I'm completely in lockstep with you, and it has everything to do with the Linn drum machine, the quantized mechanization of rhythm, and, you want the rhythm to be round. You want it to be very deep and buoyant. My daughters and cats have had digital beats crunched into their ears for decades. They don't even know what is human music. You talk to drummers, studio cats, and they'll be in one room and they'll be hearing somebody. So they'll be hearing some machine drum part, someone playing drum parts. Like, it's got to be a machine. You walk in, it's a human being playing machine parts. That's where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not only not interested in it. It goes against such a basic tenet of my personality. So it's such a deep part of me that I can't do it. It's an exercise in removing my humanity, and I don't want to do that.
I'm curious about the idea of part of the magic of those albums that you were on with Bill, and so many more, is the miking techniques. And I realize you only produced that one album by Pat, but one of the magic things, I've done a few interviews with Mike Mainieri, and he literally talked about being on the bandstand with Buddy Rich. There would be no bass amp. There'd be no bass amp. So your ears,
No.
your ears had to stretch. Your ears were huge. And I just wonder, like, when you talk about this human aesthetic and you talk about your ethos and the vibe that you like, I mean, you were of those recording eras. For instance, can you talk about how many mics were on Shelley's kit? You could mic every single drum on a drum kit today, and the sound is so sterile. Back then, it was like a right and left overhead, and maybe one for the kick drum. Sometimes the bass player. Can you talk about those techniques? Because the leakage and the space is what makes that music moody, haunting, and totally out of body.
Well, and even that can be improved on under ideal conditions. I've made a friend of mine, and I have a Swedish bass player, recording engineer friend, so many as you might see in some circumstances, but there was a mic on the bass, mic on the piano, a couple of mics on the drums, and I think 2 microphones for the 5 horns. But my engineer friend recorded the whole thing with a stereo mic set up with a blocking disc in between them that substituted for a human head, so that the microphones were essentially ears. And while the balance is not perfect, there is a lot more control of balance that you can have with multiple microphones. While the balance isn't perfect, the sense of being there in the room is orders of magnitude better with that simple miking technique.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, no. What I wanted you to talk. What I want.
I used to be a purist about this.
I know.
I used to think, set up 2 stereo microphones and get out of the way. And then I think, well, okay, well, maybe we need a mic on the bass. And then once you do that, something else gets out of whack, and you got to put a mic there, and it escalates. So I'm not. There are ways to make beautiful recordings, and probably a lot of different ways to do it. And total separation doesn't usually work for me. So that's my.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to know how much you guys, learned how to balance yourselves. I mean, you go back to any of the big bands, and I know you didn't. We're not talking about Woody Herman's band or something, but those guys, there might be like one mic for the horns. So everybody had to balance themselves. And I was wondering, like with Bill and Shelley, like if that was something you made a conscious effort to balance your own sound, because you didn't have the technology. I mean, that's the point, is that technology has superseded humanity in a lot of ways. You didn't have the technology, so you balanced your own sound. How did you do that?
How could we not?
You make it, dude. It's magic, man. The whole thing. I mean, you have no idea dude. At 42, this is everything. This is America. This was America. We look at where we're at today. We have freaking SOS people, no identification, beating people, beating civilians. The lack of humanity, and it all is a reflection through music too. So I mean,
I don't disagree with you. I think the music represents the same kind of ignorance that's governing the country at the moment.
I'd say it represents callousness, not ignorance, callousness.
Yes, absolutely. And I am cautiously hopeful that it won't last more than a few more months. I'm hopeful. If it does last another 4 years, I am not hopeful about the country surviving.
If you think back to your elders, your stepdad and Pete and the cats that were swept up in the Red Scare and the ones that survived, what is some of the nuggets of wisdom that you hold on to in the face of, essentially a fascist, domineering, soulless, like you said, a re-election of this individual will forever end whatever we consider to be the American experiment.
I don't know. My mother used to say, "Time wounds all heals."
Dude, your mom was a hip cat.
So
time wounds all heals.
Yeah, it's a reversal of.
I do. I love it. I do. I'm taking that from your mom, dude. That's a great line.
Yeah.
Listen, we've been cooking for 90 minutes. Can we do set 2? I just feel like we're just getting going here.
Well, sure.
All right. It was a long time coming, and I most importantly, my hope is that when you get off the phone, you're happy and you're in a more reflective place. That's kind of my goal.
Well, I'll go back to writing music. This wasn't live, was it?
No, we were next time. Yeah, it was live to the world, and it's going to go up I'm going to go home, put it up as a podcast, and I'll email it. I believe you have your email. I'll send you the email with the podcast, and then I'll reach out to you again in a couple of weeks, and we'll set up another time to do set 2.
Okay. The reason I asked is that I have a friend in Tucson who would be interested in hearing this.
Oh, well, yeah. No, first of all, this is a full internet streaming station, so we were streaming live in the motherland right now and in India, let alone Tucson. But yeah, who's your friend in Tucson?
Well, I wrote a memoir, and I was down in Tucson about 3 years ago and ran into a woman named Deborah Sanders, who was an editor, and she helped edit my manuscript, and we became good friends. She's just someone I ran into when I was playing in a restaurant there where there was some jazz, and she was in the audience, and we struck up a conversation. And anyway,
you know what it is. What I'm humbled about is that you would think that she would be interested in hearing this. But man, I'll send you some other interviews because, like I said, all this is the magic of this. Also, is it's old school radio, and you're hearing the voice of people, and you're going to hear Pat talking about you and Bob Cranshaw talking about you, and just recognize like your path. I've been on this insecure journey for 10 years, and I've been shedding. So just keep your love light on, man, and we'll be together again.
Okay.
All right, great. Man. Be cool.
Thank you.
Bye, Chuck.
Bye.
Bye.